For any of you who are just tuning in, this is part 2 of the good old analysis of Braddock and why he's amazing, and we're looking at his Terran vs. Zerg today, so we will be bouncing directly on over to the game once again. So, just wanted to make sure that all was sorted out and that all was fine. And of course, it is pretty much resolved right now. And if anyone's still having lag issues, just refresh and just hang out for a little bit. So already some little nice fancy moves by Braddock. The fact that he's building this depot before he built his marine to permanently wall in the drone. One thing that's always interesting is when you do get a lot of replays of one player, and Braddock was kind enough to send me like 250 of his most recent ladder games and all of his Zotac Cup games. The advantage you get of being able to see a lot of replays of one person is you start seeing themes across the matchup. So you saw in the last game where I said, oh, look at one matchup, how Braddock's using this one build and how he's rearranging it in all these different ways. Isn't that fancy? But now we're going to see his Terran vs. Zerg and note some of the things that we saw from the previous one. So that's going to be a lot of fun. But either way, mind doing this more new schoolish style of Zerg versus Terran, where you get the gas very fast, and see there is the metabolic boost upgrade coming out right now. The queen is indeed making larvae, because what else would you do with a queen? But these Zerglings with speed are going to be very helpful early on. Notice that Braddock pretty much got this factory about as fast as he could, and got the Hellion relatively quickly, and Lings with speed are already more than done. Plenty of time. And a nice little push by Braddock to go to this Xel'Naga Watchtower. This little tiny push, handful of Marines, and then constantly rallied Hellions is an extraordinarily potent mix. That definitely is something that I would recommend for any Terran player. Because, you know, this sort of stuff happens where they're having to make spine crawlers, and of course they really do not want to. So, definitely good play to do. And at the very least, you just pull back and then nothing bad really happens. And Braddock doing, I would call this a little bit newer school, getting the Viking out really fast to do scouting to kill off overlords. And notice this path that he takes. This is the easy overlord kill zone. Almost all Zerg players are going to have at least something in here. And of course, very nice defense by Braddock as he pulls back. He's making more racks. And hey, you know, this is already a similarity that we're starting to see between Braddock in Terran vs. Protoss and Braddock in Terran vs. Zerg. He loves getting this very early Starport and starting to produce medivacs one at a time. So we see a lot of players who will get the Starport eventually, but they'll pretty much only make units out of it if it has this reactor. Or should I say if it has an add-on on it at all. Very few people tend to just get a unit producing structure and slowly produce one unit out of it. But that's exactly what we're seeing Braddock doing, and it just is awesome. So absolutely absolutely excellent little thing. And of course I turned off game sound because I am amazing. It's very good that I always do. Remember to turn it off when the stream goes down. And of course, always forget to turn it on when the stream goes up. But anyways, so very rarely do you see players opt to get this one Starport out and begin slowly producing out of it. Concussive shells going down for the early Marauder pushing. Already has one kill on the Overlord. And yeah, I love this style by Mind, where you just sort of get a third queen whenever you see any hint of tech, because you can pretty easily deal with any number of Banshees, much of anything really, and you can pick off these Vikings no problem. But as we see Braddock just building up a nice little force, getting ready to do a nice little push, and this mix is something I'm really interested in. This 2 barracks, 1 Starport mix. Because it allows for a lot of early pushes. And pretty much any good strategy in Brood War was an early push after you expanded, or as you expanded, or something like that. You know, it's pretty amazing if you think about all the builds that fall into that category. I mean, let's just take one matchup, Terran vs. Zerg. If the Terran early expands, like 1 barracks early expands, he's almost certainly going to be moving out with like 12... Marines, 2 medics, if he can. Maybe 2 firebats in there as well. The Zerg, who early expands, then gets out some Mutalisks and harasses while taking another expansion. Very typical style of play to see, where there's just a little force that's doing stuff, that's doing interesting junk. And in StarCraft 2, we haven't really seen a ton of that. There are ways to do that people have played with. In the very early stages, people will do stuff with Reapers and Hellions and all this other good jazz, but rarely do we get to see exactly what Braddock is doing here, which is going to be about a 70 food push. Hasn't done anything quite yet, is getting stim now. In those games against Protosses, he was getting the combat shield upgrade first, and then afterwards he was getting the stim. But in this game, it looks like he's getting the stim relatively early on. Makes sense to me. Especially considering he's getting quite a few Marauders in this mix. And meanwhile, Zerg is doing a pretty normal thing. Layer's almost up, and of course this layer was scouted by the Viking. The Viking saw the layer wasn't quite done yet, so it does have a little bit of knowledge of what the possible tech patterns for Zerg are. So Braddock is going to poke around here, doesn't want to deal with any counterattacks. Excellent. And he's going to regroup here, and he's going to eventually move out for a push. And notice that Braddock's money is pretty low. His expansion is reasonably fast. Did a little bit of poking with the Viking, a little bit of cool stuff with the Marines and that one Hellion. Yeah, here are some Zerglings trying to poke him here, but doesn't quite work out, as you may clearly see. But adding on more tech labs is a little bit interesting of a choice. A lot of players have been steering away from Marauders in this matchup because Zerglings are so strong. But of course, Braddock is a badass, so he will do as he pleases. But yeah, look at this. Slow build-up with the medivacs. Notice two of them have quite a lot of energy. Makes for a very nice little push. And hey, now this is what we're about to see is just some unbelievable fanciness. I did get the chance to see about the first half of this game. So Braddock will be moving forward, and oh no, look, there's all this creep. Oh, cool, yeah, I'll just hop right up onto your high ground. Yeah, isn't that awesome? If you can get an early push going with Terran, you can be really scary and just circumvent all these spine crawlers and all these defenses set up. Look how much damage Braddock's able to do, and look at that nice micro. You need to be careful not to have these medivacs in that control group. And by the way, I'm just going to stop right now. In a lot of my mechanics casts, I can't remember the exact numbers of them, but I've been doing increasingly more of just me playing around in a, in QXC's build order tester or something like that. And you'll hear me talk about how, actually in the most recent one, I talked about how when you want a hotkey setup, just make sure your hotkey setup makes sense for you. For instance, I had a pretty normal hotkey setup with Zerg, which is 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0 as hatcheries and 1, 2, 3, 4 as units. And occasionally, when I only had 5 hatcheries, I would use 0 as some sort of special set of units. So like overlords that were in a drop, or Scourge, or a Defiler, or something that I needed to just have access to on the fly. But in a more weird example, I said that I've seen a player use 1 as scan and then 2, 3, 4 as medic marine. So that way he could stim really easily. If you just look at the keyboard, 2A, 3A, 4A is pretty easy to type with your hand. But the 1A is a little bit awkward. So we just skipped it, and then he just does 2A, 3A, 4A. And here, this is something I just noticed. Strategy aside, look at this hotkey setup. 1 by Braddock is a factory and a starport. 2 is all his barracks. 3 is this orbital command. And 4 is all his units. I want you to just put your hand on your keyboard right now and look at how easy it is to go 4A. And all the way up here is 9 and 0 for his orbital commands. So that way, it looks like he can easily have 0 and 9 available for scans, very StarCraft 1 style. And this 3 he can easily override later in the game. Right now he's going to use it primarily for SCVs and all that good stuff. But either way, these Mutalisks by Mind pop out just barely in time. The Marauders are going to be able to do quite a bit of damage. And again, notice this is something that I think a lot of people do not know, and I'm going to back up here. And I will slow it down, actually. I want you to look at the health of these medivacs. Mutalisks actually target medivacs over Marines. Look at how the medivac is taking damage up here. And Mind is having to individually target these things. Notice how these Mutalisks shot down that first medevac. And then Mind had to target fire. And now they're shooting down. And look, he moved these back, he moved these down, hit attack, and they just whipped right around to hit the medevacs. The medevac is, for some reason, the maximum priority attack unit for the Mutalisks and for various other units. So, kind of weird, but definitely something to be aware of. Now, it's still pretty even here, but mine is going to be able to come in here and do a lot of damage. It's going to be pretty severe, honestly. But fortunately, missile turrets are just outrageously strong against Mutalisks, so as long as you spam those, you'll be okay. But this is exactly the spot you want to be in with Mutalisks. Getting right here and just planting yourself over the barracks. Just look at how the food slowly spreads apart. Because I think everyone knows if you harass workers, they will have a weaker economy later on. But a lot of people neglect just park